Today, we're joined by Fred Grinstein, a highly accomplished creative executive and media strategist with 2 decades of experience in premium film, television, and emerging technologies like AI and Web3. Fred has worked on high profile projects for organizations like Anonymous Content, History Channel, and A&E, blending traditional storytelling with cutting edge technology. In today's conversation, Fred will share valuable insights on how AI is revolutionizing nonfiction storytelling, practical strategies for upskilling creative teams, and how leading media organizations are successfully integrating AI to transform their operations. We'll also dive deep into compelling case studies from Fred's work, providing actionable takeaways for creatively driven businesses looking to leverage AI. Fred, welcome to Just Curious.
Super psyched to be here, and I love what you're doing. This is a great opportunity for the visitors of your website and the business you're building.
Thank you. For people who don't know you, your career spans from traditional television hits like Storage Wars to cutting edge AI and synthetic media. Can you share what sparked your pivot to AI and how your background informs your approach?
Totally. I mean, I got out of college a longer time ago than maybe, although the white hairs in my beard are starting to give away. I used to have a browner beard. I noticed I could get away with being younger. But I got out of college when independent film was an exciting thing to do. And that was where novelty and invention and new voices and this kind of democratization effect that we're talking so much about with people that are following the Gen AI space. That's when it was happening to a lot of people in our generation. I sort of didn't find a home immediately. And then I was very fortunate in those early 2000s that this unscripted TV kind of boom happened. And it really was a boom. It really started as, and I often think of it as like a technology moment. It's something that I don't even think even people within the industry notice as much as like, some people say the first unscripted show might have been Cops on Fox, which was literally somebody saying, people like shows about police officers. What if we just had a couple people follow them around with cameras? And that obviously was a big successful show, also polarizing to a lot of people about how we've entertainmentized law enforcement. But the point is that in so many hundreds of other shows, formats, production teams, companies, cable networks that had been built for a previous era, but all of a sudden the Animal Planets of the world had a lot of work to do. Like all of a sudden there was this thriving industry that I really think was built on technology. It was smaller cameras, cheaper editing setups, in some cases, eventually shipping new tools like time lapse and slow motion and these things that then Discovery Channel would do a whole show about slow motion. So it was a different era than the one we're living in now. But I found myself in that not as the kid in high school that like had to be Steven Spielberg and I loved picking up the camera. I just loved the ideas. I loved the development process. We were doing like experiments with humans in TV shows. We were like coming up with sort of the ability to suddenly become anthropologists and find Amish people in somewhere and like, wait, if they give us permission to follow them, can we make a show about them? There's just this really buzzy time where like ideas and what if were a big part of content creation. It wasn't like, oh, I need to know how to be a great Hollywood writer. I need to have access at WME. We were already in this phase that people were getting admission into the ability to be a creator, to be a storyteller in a mass scale because of the technology and the opportunity of those types of stories. So I often relate to that. And I've thought a lot about this. My career sort of then, got into the network side. I was very fortunate to be at A&E and sort of be a part of what was kind of this like bellwether moment for the cable industry in the mid 2010s. I jumped into a Viceland, which at the time was a merger or a joint venture with the A&E building, so to speak. So I was always like on this, like, I just love this ideas and business, this creative and entrepreneurial hustle that I think was a very thriving part of being an unscripted for a long time. To me, around 2020, I mean, a lot has shifted for a lot of people in the entertainment business in general. But that's when, I'll be honest, I was starting to lose the joy for the work I was doing. I wasn't getting to have that exchange between distributors and buyers and the types of ideas we're coming up with. That spark of like, what if was a big piece of what moved forward. So for a variety of reasons, I have felt almost more at home in this place that I had no business coming to, by the way. I didn't have any data science degree. I didn't have all the smart people that were studying AI before 2022 and 23. I was not one of those people. I wish I was. I came at this with just the same instinct that I often felt was associated with coming up with a good idea for an unscripted show. It's like, that feels like a thing over there. That feels like a thing that we can tinker with, that we can come up with formats that consumers will be interested in. And I even have enjoyed not having to only think about that as something that maybe Ted Sarandos likes, although there's a lot of good people making good money keeping Netflix busy. I just meant like, are there other mediums? Obviously, I've left out YouTube because I sadly never got to have my YouTube chapter, but there's clearly other places besides mainstream distribution to succeed in. So to me, I really got excited to find new toys. To me, that at first was a dip into the Web3 space that was very noisy around 21 and 22. It went up and down, and I think people have their own opinions of it. I found this first example of like, we were starting, forget the crypto stuff and forget a lot of the things that are very polarizing. There were some very interesting experiments starting of like, how do we start playing with creator economy and thinking about technology as doing something interesting and different there. And that's really where I started building a new peer group. That's how I started evolving as someone that might use this word creator. And frankly, leaning hard into a learning mindset and leaning hard into, I'm at a mid stage of my career, but there's the opportunity to almost be back at being 25 again in terms of how I can start pivoting my energies. AI has been an incredible community here in LA. And there's a lot to unpack there of like how interesting and challenging and different adjectives it's been given the evolution of Hollywood, given the evolution of the strikes and a lot of the things that are even still advocacy wars over what's the right thing to do. And we don't have to resolve those things, but it's been a place to be, to feel like at the center of that story, to be at the center of a community that's working on answers. So I've sort of in the last 2 or 3 years taken that technology shift, moving out of being a TV development executive, but now being more of a creative entrepreneur in a mindset, doing a lot of learning, building a new peer group that we meet up and we participate and we explore these things in very meaningful ways. We have a community called Machine Cinema that we can talk more about. That's been one of our settings. That's been one of the places that we as a growing community get together to work with these tools and then start experimenting. Where is this starting to come back to our careers? How is this coming back to the industry? But that's been a bit of a snapshot of my arc. I know I covered a lot there, but that's sadly the answer to your question.
Well, I got a follow up. You mentioned machine cinema, and I know you're working on a few different things right now. Tell us a little bit about machine cinema and some of the other work you're doing in AI, what you're doing and who you're doing it for, just so people have sort of full context for like who you are and what you
Absolutely. So one of my I don't know if it's a superhero hat, but it's different than this hat. Me and my co-founder, Mindo, I'm very proud to call him a friend and a co-founder. We came out of some of those Web3 experiments working for different companies with an interesting intersection. He is more of a tech background, more of a VC sort of experience, and also done a lot of tech journalism, but a lover of storytelling, lover of filmmaking. And then I obviously come from more of a traditional film TV background. Like I said, sort of found my way into rooms with technology in them. So we just became a great partnership, exploring different ways to work together. And as AI landed, we just found ourselves starting to vlog, starting to have, sort of open conversations, seeing, where our community might find us. And then one of the things that just really in the last year and a half has really exploded is we just started getting people together. And this thing that we call AIRL, it's a bit of a tagline, but it's this, how do we consciously look past one of the observations people worry about? The internet's a very lonely place. Is AI content generation just an extension of how people are sort of leaving, the present world? Or even the film set experience that seems to be so under fire by these more virtual production models that frankly predate AI, but are clearly being accelerated by how powerful these tools are. We get people together. So we started off getting people in our backyards and just starting to get laptops out and saying, hey, what can we do with these things? So we had a few early just get-togethers that were truly just get-togethers. But then literally right around this time last year, our friend Todd Terrazas and his team at AILA, who were already kind of in this little kind of emerging cohort. I mean, Todd's been community developing for a decade. So nothing new to what he's doing, but he was part of this moment that I got to be a part of. He helped us participate at the AI on the Lot Summit that is happening actually end of this month, the 3rd annual, but last year was the 2nd annual. And we got to do what we had been doing in our backyards, what we've been doing in living rooms with, and sometimes dozens of friends. We did that with now 60 people. We did what we call a gen battle. And what it was is what we'd been doing is we get our laptops out. One of us kind of gets up there and says, okay, here's a workflow of tools that I've been tinkering with. It helps me make a little spec ad, or it helps me make a music video, or maybe this helps me make one of these fake trailers that everybody's making these days. But it's not just some slot machine moment where I just type in a prompt and I make something. It's where people like us who are coming from storytelling or coming from technology are seeing the Lego blocks of like, wait, if I ideate over here, get some generative audio over here, get my editor out, maybe even a free editor like CapCut if I'm not a person who's ever had Premiere before, start learning about storyboard, like you start sequencing these tools, and then that's what the new toolkit starts to look like. And we basically created this event series that we call Gen Jams and Gen Battles sometimes when they're a little bit more game showy. But to create a setting where we usually get about 50 to 60 people, everybody sits through a tutorial, that we present, and we often have great partnerships with sponsors and tools who kind of love the attention that we're bringing to their tools, and we're really bringing power users. That we're people
Yeah.
that aren't just tourists on the internet, people that are leaning in to say, I want to use this. Break people up into teams of 3 or 4, make some new friends, do something that most of us as introverts or as people stuck at home in our bedrooms making these things by ourselves don't get exposed to enough, which is the soft skills of life and getting out there and connecting with people. And then we get people to make a little short film that by the end of that evening, usually about 4 hours, we have like a little mini film fest. And some people win, some people laugh. There's sort of bragging rights exchanged, but that cycle, it sort of goes to something that, as I've been doing a lot of consulting in this space, I really believe most people's education arc with AI, especially if they're coming from zero, this is like learning how to swim. This is something that your body doesn't necessarily know how to do. You're not a fish, but there's clearly tactics that you can apply to your ability to engage with water. And I think, look, most of us learn how to swim and then we're good and then we're off to the races. And I think that's most people's kind of interaction with this technology is at some point you start finding a way for it to speak to you and you start adapting to it. And we can talk more about that. These Gen Jams are like a pool party. Like we basically just get everybody to jump into the pool, play sharks and minnows for 4 hours. Could we slow it down and learn how to backstroke and freestyle and butterfly? Absolutely. And that's what education platforms do. And we also do those workshops. We also, both Min and I, do work with Curious Refuge, which is one of the leading AI filmmaking online resources for learning. So there's also time-shifted settings to learn at a proper pace. But these events become this amazing way to just toss people into the pool, as we sometimes did with our kids back in the day, to then just bump around, almost drown, grab the wall, be okay. And then that's how you start to look around and see, how do we do this thing that we call storytelling with AI?
Yeah, I love it. I imagine that bringing 60 people together, you've got a broad spectrum of experiences, both within AI, but outside, and people have the opportunity to learn from each other.
That's the point. Yeah. It's actually an interesting cross section because we have a community that's grown out of these events. We have a WhatsApp group that has almost 1,000 people in it now. Min has now, because he doesn't have kids and he travels a lot more than I do, but also because he's sort of has this relentless energy to share and connect with people about this stuff. And it's been amazing for what we've been growing. We have a community in LA, San Francisco, and New York that are thriving. They're well into the hundreds in each city. We have another community in Seattle, growing communities in Phoenix, Europe. We actually even have this amazing contingent of African filmmakers that some of them from Senegal, some are from Benin and Nigeria that have also joined our WhatsApp chat and are just this incredible mix of people just having daily, all day long, kind of a fire hose of conversations. I mean, we all know that the group chats become a thing, like the Wired magazines of the world have put this out there as where the Illuminati likes to plot, but it's also an amazing way to start entering these new emergent spaces for a lot of busy people, especially busy people that don't necessarily live in the same place. It's become a central hub for us. We've now expanded into having a weekly podcast where we interview people like you, Stuart, that are exploring stuff. So today I get to change hats. We've been running that podcast for several weeks now. And we also have like a weekly newsletter that's coming out. We do content. So while we are in this moment that people feel like they want to come to this, Mothlight, we're there to kind of provide, some opportunities.
Let's dig into AI and creativity. So for creative leaders who are overwhelmed by AI, where should they realistically begin their adoption journey? And I guess it's to jump in the pool. But for someone who's a creative, what does that mean?
I mean, I think the creative industry, you can't ignore what a lot of people are going through. And I think that's part of like, when I do consults, I think it's important to create an emotional space for this stuff because I think a year ago, people in a consult position would often say things like, oh, it's just a tool. And it's a way to sort of start chilling people out. And then that might even be enough to answer your question. Like, these are tools, start learning how to use them. I do think I'm a year into having these types of conversations with people. And I don't think it's just a tool. I think this is a complete recalibration of the way humans are interacting with the world. I do think it's almost more like a car in terms of we are building entire cities in different ways because of how cars in fact impact our ability to commute. We have different geopolitical relationships with parts of the world that we might have different relationships with them if we didn't have gas to consume. And I think that what's going on between the US and China is unavoidable. So I don't mean to zoom out too much, but I think this stuff is circulating in a new user's mind because they read the news, they worry about things. So I try to at least get people to start realizing, yes, all of those things are valid. And you are welcome to wonder if these things are NFTs and they're just going to go away. I think we're past that stage. And that's kind of where I try to get people to like, okay, I'm not going to resolve those things for you, but you were better off starting to jump in and building your own knowledge base. So I think my consult decks literally lead with, here's 20 different newsletters to start following up with. Here's people to start adding to your news instead of just hoping the New York Times reports on this for you. Like the ability to engage with this professionally comes from your learning mindset. So I really challenge people to kind of get their heads out of the sand, get over the worries, and know that those aren't going to go away, but they're also going to start get informed by why this is happening, which is that this is changing people's relationship with productivity. And that's the first light bulb that anybody who's really had a meaningful exchange with ChatGPT or Claude or now Gemini is getting bigger and bigger. That is level one. Is that you're starting to upskill with your interaction with information, your interaction with how you would write an email, your interaction with how you do tedious work, all the things that are a part of our working professional lives. That is why the LLMs to me are the most important thing to obsess over. A lot of the video stuff, a lot of these other tools are possibly settling into being industry standard, but there's a lot of competition there. The notion of applying an LLM mindset to everything that you do, I think is standard now. I look at people like Ethan Mollick, who's a Wharton University professor who was part of the masterclass there's 4 contributors that were part of a teaching series on masterclass. He does TED Talks. I mean, he's a legitimate voice, and there's so many people, maybe like me, that are talking and talking. He wrote a great book called Co-Intelligence. It's literally a 5-hour audiobook. I think anybody in their life has 5 hours they could carve out, and you could just listen to it over the weekend. I think that's the type of book that every company should just tell all their employees, everybody read this over the weekend, and let's show up on Monday of how we're going to start applying this stuff. So to me, there's like an upskill moment that comes with either that type of self-education or corporate education, or literally starting to spend time with the LLMs, because that's really what his book leans into, is developing our relationships with LLMs. And I think that is where we start shifting our mindset. So I think about this in 3 tiers. There's upskilling, which I think is essential. And I don't think they're alone, but in Singapore, right around a year and a half ago, when this stuff became very present as a technology, they literally said everybody over the age of 40 needs to learn how to use AI technology. Like that's a country taking this seriously. I think Finland did something similar. I think other places in the world. We're not in that country right now, although I think the White House just released something about for children and education. That's how serious I think everybody needs to take this. This is like learning to drive. And that's where everybody starts entering a new relationship with how would their companies be built today. And so starting to be a part of that conversation, not waiting for your employer to do it for you, or if you're a small business to just go ahead and do it, not just wait for a consultant to walk into. Like it is that accessible. And that's how it's either an arbitrage opportunities for the right people today, or just something that everybody's doing, especially creative industries. To go back to your question, unlike a lot of other just pure productivity businesses, this is where we're starting to scratch at the thing that's most emotional, which is that this stuff is doing stuff that we thought was uniquely human. This is doing stuff that we didn't think was on the table. And that's why this falls back into this emotional place that is well stoked by a lot of advocacy efforts that may or may not win or be right. I'm not even engaging on that. I'm just saying that's part of the journey of what do I do here? I'm listening to my peers. I'm listening to my union. I'm listening. So look, you need to find your peace with that. But minimally, the development stage of creativity has entered rocket boom era. And that we're not publishing yet. We're not worrying about stealing IP or doing anything. We're just starting to do what we do. Like when we throw a sizzle together for an unscripted show, I'll throw Bruce Springsteen on there. The network will listen to that tape. Nobody's worried about Bruce Springsteen. And then when I actually have to make the TV show, I know I have to license that song. So we've been in this borrowing creativity business for a long time when we're just pitching. So I think for anybody in the creative industries, find your comfort zone, but run towards the development opportunity. How are we using ChatGPT to ideate and story create? How are we using Midjourney or Ideogram or Imogen? That's why this starts to become, there's lots of tools to keep up with, to visualize, to start storyboarding and not waiting for somebody's availability to just get that idea in my head to get on a piece of paper. How do I go ahead and even rapid prototype that? Like when we do our Gen Jams, that's basically what we're doing. We're rapid prototyping. We're saying, all right, everybody, come up with 10 movie trailers. Okay. Most of them are terrible. And then one of them might be kind of good. And if everybody sat through the film school obsession of this needs to be my Martin Scorsese piece, nothing would ever get done. But when we say yes or no faster, we're getting to blow through ideas faster, and we're getting to come with more opportunities to say yes. So that is the creative step 2, is you're starting to relate to the creative resources differently. That thing that used to be like, okay, this is going to take me 3 weeks to do, could take you the next hour to do. And if you suddenly enter your thing that you love to do, being creative, with the assumption that, wait, coming up with an idea and seeing if I like it now takes me hours, not weeks. Well, now you get to come up with 20 ideas. and you get to say no to 19 of them. And now that one idea is even more interesting than the one that you would have put a lot of time in those 3 weeks on. So I think that is this shift. Now that creates this really important existential choice for business owners, because now you're staring at the economics, and now you're staring at the idea that, wait a second, now everything's cheaper, potentially. Everything is faster. So I really think this is where the industry is starting to notice itself. The people that are jumping in is like, does that mean that I need to tell my distributor that my budget's actually a lot smaller than that budget I sent them? Does that mean that I need less people at this company? Does that mean this is the scary stuff? And I do think this is why those emotions can't go away. We need to sort of still keep our humanity and this relationship with this tech. I really want to be glass half full about that existential and actually say, what if instead of feeling that pressure of having to do everything cheaper and faster, what if you actually said, now I can do more? Now I want to figure out what's the tilt of saying, instead of me delivering that one product faster and cheaper, what if I actually pushed back on that energy and said, wait, no, I got a family in this company that I built, or I have a lot of things I want to do, not just this one thing. And I think if we can go into that abundance mindset, I don't know if we're going to get everything we want out of that. I don't know if the math adds up that everybody keeps their jobs, but I do think that's the right thing to do with that discovery, which is that your creative process just totally changed. And then we're really looking at what's the future look like. And then that's all speculation. But I think this is the steps that every creative person is going through right now.
Can you expand on what you mean by arbitrage opportunity? I think you said that earlier in your answer, and I'm curious what that means and
I
yeah, what
mean,
is the opportunity maybe?
I'm no like financial trader. I think arbitrage is when I know that I can sell a dollar for more money over here than it costs me over there. And then that little bit of 10%, if I do that times a million, I can be very rich. I think there's a few people that have done that. I think conceptually arbitrage is that you have an advantage. And I think some people, this becomes moats, the business of moats, that there's some moment in time that right now you and your team have access to make things cheaper and faster potentially, or you have access to this technology that's sexy to people that don't have the time or energy to pay attention to it. So, or you have this information that's putting your company and business into a place that you get to operate at this new speed faster than others. I think in the short term, that's going to benefit a lot of people. That'll either make them short-term money or maybe put them in new types of positions in the industry that they're prone to go in different directions than they were last year. But it is advantage, and it's profiting off of advantage. I personally think that is a short-term dynamic, and even one that will every month become a new type of arbitrage. Like, for example, there was a Wall Street Journal article this weekend about how in 2023, like the prompt engineer job description felt like the thing. Like that was the job. Like everybody you should be hurrying up. Anybody's worried about employment, go become a prompt engineer because you're gonna make $200,000 out of the gate. Okay, that job's obsolete now. That isn't a job because the technology surrounding that job description has gotten better. And actually it's even easier to indoctrinate your company into this technology. But I think that is where I don't put a lot of stock in that arbitrage, but I do think it's something to notice and maybe think about your short-term wins and the way that you're positioning yourself to be nimble. But I would rather people take a little bit of extra money if they make it because they found some arbitrage, but instead have that mindset on, I'm going to start moving in this direction. I'm going to start gaining the skills or the opportunities of the present and the future.
Can you describe common hurdles that content creators face when introducing AI tools into their workflows?
I mean, I think some of them are macro things like these questions of copyright and questions of, in some ways, the debates about ethics. I don't want to call them questions because they're things that people disagree about. But I do think there's these underlying uncertainties that surround these things, which is arguably why we haven't seen this mass shift. There's people that could tell you that behind the scenes at major studios, there's plenty of activity. It's just that this public relations relationship with guilds and people that strongly disagree, like it creates a friction, especially here in LA, that might even be healthy. I'm not here to weigh in on it. I'm just saying that's to answer that's a very real dynamic. So in some ways there's like a what does your lawyer say moment. So at a massive distribution level, what does your lawyer say? Does it worry us that right now the US Copyright Office will say that content that's made by generative AI has legitimate questions around whether or not it can be copyrighted? Okay, like whether or not you can go on YouTube and tell that YouTuber to take something down that is copying your work because you're protecting your IP. That is just core traditional business model that a lot of people have no interest in reinventing. And that it becomes a hurdle of like, can your business actually use this technology? So that's hurdle number one, that ultimately is your lawyers deciding where do your business's practice sit inside this technology. The idea of finding whether you have an ethical opinion about this stuff, I think is a layer. and I think that's a longer conversation, but there's an interesting open debates. I mean, today I just saw a link go around of like a kids content company out of the UK that they're like, here's our manifesto. Here's our company manifesto. Here's the tools we use. We only work this way. And they started creating their guardrails of what's important to us. So there is a moment right now that there's a lack of clarity objectively to where industrial creativity can go with this tech. There's lawsuits literally about the other side of copyright, that there's a question about the underlying data that's been scraped and has taken all these artists' rights. And there's a lot of rightful anger and feelings about that stuff. There's also a lot of complicated debate around that, but those lawsuits aren't resolved. I don't highly doubt the outcome to those lawsuits is that they're going to shut down businesses that are in some cases making a lot of money to lobby places like Washington. But I do think they might create precedents that we all know what to do with moving forward. So as those questions emerge, the average creator that maybe isn't here yet, that reads newspapers, that maybe even highlight these bigger debates in the news more than like, isn't it cool that you could just animate your own movie? Like that's the kind of news feed you get on LinkedIn. It's like now everybody's like, oh wow, me and my 5-year-old just made a cool film. Nobody's worrying about the copyright surrounding it. They just think it's cool that them and their 5-year-old made a film. So that's where I think people in the business of creativity do have a very legitimate thing to figure out. And that's you and your lawyers and your best practices to figure out. On a deeper level, just as a creator, there's that sort of, am I jumping into this pool or not moment that I think we talked about how at places like Machine Cinema, we try to create spaces for that. Look, the information is free. Let's just start there. The YouTube is flooded with people giving it away. Like, how do I use this stuff? So I do think there is a mindset of curiosity that someone that's saying, where does this sit for me? It does start there. There are structured environments to learn, like Curious Refuge. There are zillions of consultants, myself included, that are out trying to create opportunities for sometimes people within our own network. So it is not hard to say, I want to give this a try. But I think the things that people will go through early will be this combination of delight and worry, because they're noticing things are changing in the assumptions. They're noticing that the abilities that they thought were, oh, well, this is how I define myself. I have this unique ability to do X and Y. Depending on where the business of that tool you're using wants to go, if you're selling this to an ad agency, you're selling this to a TV channel, suddenly everybody has access to that look that you and your camera used to be very good at creating. So camera people are entering a complicated place. We were talking about your wife before. People that are in the costume design business or the makeup design, they're suddenly entering a place that the craft of what they did, it's not, I don't know, I hate to say it, it's being devalued, by this technology. And I don't mean that in like a mean, nice way. I mean that it's just worth less on some objective level because now somebody can achieve that. The same way Photoshop did that for a lot of people that used to do stuff with chemicals and darkrooms. So I think that's a creator's a little bit outside of this bubble's first journey. It can be easily be supplanted with what I was talking about before of like, and also the sudden feeling of productivity. And wait a second, now I can actually achieve more with these things. And if you're actually talented, I think these things actually tend to inspire you.
Let's talk about your work. Can you walk us through how you approach integrating AI into nonfiction TV and documentary film?
Sure. I mean, I think as I found my footing in this space, I think I definitely noticed a lot of people doing sci-fi and fantasy and like horror. And I'm like, I don't know anything about that stuff. And I suspect that there's a lot of better people than me. So at some point, I sort of went through my journey of, okay, this is a thing. I should pay attention to it. And then at some point, what can I give back here? What can I do here? So taking my experience in unscripted and nonfiction, that felt like, okay, I want to conduct this inquiry. And I sort of read somewhere on LinkedIn that, a good way to create content on LinkedIn is to ask questions and take people with you. Sort of like, sort of do the today I learned type content, which I think was a big shift for me too, is that I think starting to treat that relationship in these social spaces, like I'm not much of a social media guy, but I got this idea that like, if I go to South by Southwest, we're there to contribute. And I started to feel that way. So this was my contribution. I want to talk about this intersection. And there's a lot of questions surrounding it. So that led me to start spending time writing about it. And then I started teaching it at Curious Refuge. We do an AI for documentaries class, which I even had this whole like imposter syndrome feeling doing it. I'm like, wait, like, what am I? We don't even know what this is. How am I teaching this? But I think I really entered it as an inquiry. Like, how do we approach this with what we know about documentary, with what we know about unscripted? And how do these tools help us do that stuff? And how do we do that innovatively? And it was great timing because there was also this great group called the APA, the Archival Producers Alliance, that as other members of communities that are being affected by this technology, they were raising their red flags about how the concerns surrounding how is AI confusing the historical record? How are we just running towards misinformation? How is this doing all the things that should worry about us instead of just feel like it's fun to meme our way through the internet? So it was interesting that they actually stepped to create ethical guidelines for unscripted and documentaries. And that really timed itself perfectly with what I was starting to do with this class. So to me, that was a very instant way to like, all right, how are we doing the thing that unscripted and I don't say should in like a finger wag way, but like if you care about the notion that your film that you call a documentary is conveying to its viewer that it's real, then you should have a transparent social contract with your process and what they're doing. And I think we were starting to actually create that conversation with things like what the APA created. I definitely encourage everybody to check out their website. They've got these amazing guidelines and toolkits, and they don't make money off this. They're just an advocacy group. And I always like, I'm interested in the advocacy groups, people that are just waking up every day and doing stuff because they have to, not because they're making money off of it. So to me, that created this use case of like, all right, so um, on the one hand, let's have a bunch of fun. Let's do really cool stuff. And let's like look for these perimeters of where AI was helping tell true stories. So like I remember in 2019, my first real exposure was this film called Welcome to Chechnya that David France, who's the director of How to Survive a Plague, he made this film that was about LGBT refugees in Russia that were being shuttled to safety across the continent because they're literally in danger for their lives. Like this was an unmakeable story. This was a film that you would either just have to blur everybody's faces or black box them or somehow. But what they did is they used deep fakes to give them new faces so that you could now, as a person in the film experience, relate to their humanity and do that thing that a movie should do, which is connect you with a true story. And the playbook that him and his team created in a vacuum. Nobody told them this is what you're supposed to do. Nobody said here's the step-by-step ethical practices. They just instinctively created a really, and I encourage people to reach out to me if they ever want to talk about this instance. But to me, that's a great example of like, this is what it looks like to use innovation. By the way, it created a sort of dazzling experience. They even had the thinking of like, they don't want it to be perfect. So that fake face was actually like, you could see the edges of it. It was a little bit off. And they did that on purpose because they didn't want you to get too comfortable with it. They wanted you to sort of notice there's somebody whose safety is in trouble. And on top of that, those faces that they used were faces of other queer activists. So it's even just like the super extra layers of how do I actually tell a story with these tools. So to me, that's a great example of like this intersection of, having the values of nonfiction storytelling married to the excitement of innovation. And and I think that's where in our class, we spent a lot of time looking at those case studies. And then as we look at what are other opportunities, so right now I'm doing a lot of work with some unscripted production companies and specifically the History Channel of doing like the greatest use case in the short term, which is historical recreations. Like all of us have seen like the Vikings show on History Channel. These are scripted shows, but I mean, they were sort of like, inspired by history. These are expensive things to make. If in this current climate, if you want to dazzle your audience that likes this stuff, it's actually become really cost prohibitive. Forget as like an individual creator on the internet, like just companies that need to make these shows. So that's become a very big experiment. We'll see how audiences interact with it and if they like these types of shows. But that's a huge use case of how do we make stories about parts of the history that there were no cameras, there's no drone shot flying around the dark ages, like, there's selfie moments in Caesar's Rome, but we can start to get creative with all these tools to tell stories in those spaces in ways that used to be huge timelines, huge production resources, things that you can tell yourself, oh, we just put all those people out of work. No, we didn't, because they were never going to get made. Those shows weren't going to get made. Now we're actually getting to create opportunities. So to me, that's a great example of something that adheres to doing something right or better, but also creates opportunity.
When creators come to you, and if a creator comes to you and they say, "Hey, I'd love to figure out where I can apply AI," and of course there are many flavors of AI, but where I can apply AI to better do what I do, which is create product that resonates with an audience. And there's many different aspects to that creative production. There's how you market it and how you create it. And you spoke to, being able to do historical recreations that would have cost many, many millions, 5 years ago, but now one can do much more cost effectively. But what are the, I don't know, 5 or 10 areas that they should think of? This is an area for AI, whether it's, hey, you know what, a lot of like what you do is raise money and, you can use AI to messaging and emails and so on and so forth. Maybe that's not the best use case, but what are like 5 or 10 use cases that a creator should think of as an area where AI could potentially be an unlock?
I love 5 or 10. We're going for a long list here.
Yeah, 20.
I mean, I think when I sort of prepare for a consult with a client, I ask them to fill out these Google forms where I literally ask them to ask their entire employee base, like, what are the most tedious, repetitive things that are part of your job? And then that's the first answer to your question. Like, we should look at every single one of those things. Like, I have to digest meeting notes, or I have to take like, sort of research from multiple places and have to consolidate and digest them. So we can start looking at the research process as like this incredible goldmine of probably the easiest thing for every single person listening to this. And I really think like when I was just at a talk with Reid Hoffman the other day and they asked him, what tool do you use? Deep research by ChatGPT or Google Gemini or even Perplexity as some version of this. This is going to be most people's first real interaction with agent AI, which is that you're now not just getting a quick, we've already gotten used to getting better Google responses. Like you don't just get a bunch of hits on a web page. Even Gemini and Google have gotten more thoughtful on what you get by asking the internet a question. These are tools that they may take 20 to 30 minutes to come back with your reply, because they're doing what some people say like a PhD researcher would do to come up with an answer to something that you're working on. And it isn't what's the capital of Romania. You might say, I need to do, a strategy campaign for this demographic and this part of the world for this type of idea, with this type of output. And this is the type of budget I'm working on. And these are the trends that I'm interested in, but I want to learn about other trends here. This is the type of thing that you would have with a room full of people. Then everybody has to go off and delegate tasks and do stuff. But you can have some version of what I just said with the blanks filled of what I just said, and give it a conversational query. And you can even work with ChatGPT before you're doing this query to form this query of like, I need to ask deep research for a useful thing. And you can make your way through what do you need? The same way you might sit with a room full of people to say, what's our brief that we might put an RFP out for? Okay. Then this tool, it's a Gemini 2.5 currently, which is, I think, by some accounts, the best one. The ChatGPT one, we can read into why do these companies all call their products the same names and have fun wondering how these tech titans market themselves or consciously confuse the marketing on these things. But they're very similar tools. And it is agentic in that it doesn't just go and get a quick answer. If you even understand like the token consumption, it isn't just tokening and then spending. It's tokening and then bouncing back and forth inside these hidden layers of the neural networks. And it's basically, and they even now transparently, you've probably started to see that you can see the machine talking to itself. You can see the questions and back and forth. It's like, oh, the user probably wants this. Well, I'm going to look at this. Well, actually, it turns out to be that. So it's interesting. You're watching the process there. But it'll sometimes take 20 to 25 minutes to come back with a really complete digest of whatever you needed. And it'll be like a sophisticated presentation. You can note it. You can tell it to go back to the drawing board. But that use case is incredible. Everybody's business needs to start from that level one, that no matter what it is you're ever building an idea or a product around, you now get to skip those weeks of research and analysis, or at least accelerate them significantly. I think for the writers out there, I personally think writers who are actually, really skilled. And, I think there are a lot of writers that have benefited from a world where formula and some version of automation probably was a good way to make money. I think that is starting to go away. Like if you work on a TV show where we're basically just doing the same show over and over with different characters, sadly, that is a skill a robot can help you do better. But if you're doing imaginative, creative, original content, which is what I think most writers really value here, to be in that setting and have this tool to start helping you explore the perimeters of what inspire you, that is God mode. One thing that some people do is they create their virtual writers' rooms. Like, some of us talk about how, like, to get optimal results from your LLM, you need to give it a character, role playing. So I might tell it to be someone who's very antagonistic and sort of tears apart every idea I have. And then that's type of feedback that I kind of want, that I want to really be challenged on my creative. And there's a few different tactics for this. You can create what are called custom GPTs for individual conversations with your skeptic character, with your historian character, with your Einstein character, because there's a whole bunch of data on the internet of what would Einstein say. You can start to create these separate conversations with any ideas you have. You can even create a room that they're all in. And there's been some really funny, like, sort of media experiments that Reid Hoffman has done where they literally just throw like those 6 characters on different iPhones. I can share the link with you and your listeners, where it's just kind of like brought to life of like, what if 6 different iPhones were these 6 different characters that all like talked and chirped. Skipping the theatrics, you can have that conversation. Like I've done this in a writing process where I say, okay, I'm working on an idea about near-death experiences. I want a scientist I want somebody who's coming from a spiritual, religion point of view. I want someone that has like a real strong perspective on indigenous cultures. And I want like a real skeptic in here. I forget if I said skeptic twice, but I create those characters. And then I literally say, here's a question. Can the four of you have a conversation? And I just sit there and watch the writer's room talk. Okay, so that's a huge, totally different way to interact with the writing process. That might even be nobody's bag, but it's somebody's bag. And I think most people at least go and experiment with it after I tell them about it. Those are sort of two chunks of the process, research and writing, that I think are very real for a lot of people's creative processes. The Midjourney gateway, that I think is a lot of people's sort of real kind of gateway drug to this stuff, is in their other creative tools. Flux is a good one. ChatGPT's image tool literally just loaded up 200 million new users in the span of a month because it was so sticky to people. That thing that some people used to call their photography hobby or drawing or painting, like that new relationship with just having an idea and doodling, that's an incredible place to start as another level one. To how does this affect my creativity? That's sort of like, what do I get inspired by creatively, like vibe wise, looks, characters that I might create, worlds that I might create. The ability to do that rapidly is if you haven't done it yet, like that's a really awesome thing to add to your experience database. And then I think that that's sort of where you're starting to apply these things to the very literal creative things like research, story development, visuals. To me, the most interesting thing that companies can do is, as they start upskilling, I think, as I said, as you start swimming in this ocean and learning how to backstroke, coming up with things that nobody's done yet, coming up with Lego configurations that aren't obvious. Like I was just on a call the other day with some creators who were kind of sharing ideas, and this guy talked about this short film that he made, that the assets that he had were the God, what is it called? The readings, when everybody, all the actors get together in a room to do a reading. Why am I blanking what this is called? I've lost the noun.
Something read,
The
right?
table read, Scott, excuse me. There you go. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your brain. The table read moment where he did have this project that he had in development, and he had like a group of actors that all showed up one day, and they had high quality audio. Everybody was on microphones. They all had their scripts, and they were performing. They did a great job taking a stab at that script. So now he just took that audio, and for him to advance his process, maybe he one day wants to get all those actors on a stage or in a movie, but he then started generating video off of that audio. And I was like, that's brilliant. Like, what an amazing, like, not waiting for permission of raising the money of your film to even advance it as like a test tape or a sales tape. Like, this is an amazing Lego block moment of taking something that was just a table read and now is the running audio of your film, if you can get the lip sync right, which is getting easier. There's another producer, and this is like an old suggestion, but I still think it's a really powerful one. He's based in Australia, and he had done a series for Australian TV, I think, about cricket, rugby. Forgive me, I forget which sport that I don't play it was. But it was like, a classic kind of sports doc series, interviews and B-roll and archival. And it was, it's just like it's stuff we all like. Whatever, he did like 10-part series, that show. And then he's on the cusp of trying to get season 2 from the network. And normally you have to go and do a bunch of research. You have to go and get all these like sample stories and make sure you're referencing real people. You have to really go do the work of how do I prep the stories for season 2. And what he did is he took the transcripts from season 1, every episode, fed them into Claude, gave it a very clean prompt that I think, again, is getting easier and easier today with these intuitive kind of reasoning models, and kind of said, give me season 2. And he was able to quickly transform weeks of work into a few hours, get that in front of the network. And everybody's like, this is pretty good. They go, cool. Let's go and properly research this. But those are the productivity moments that wasn't on the user's manual. That wasn't like something that Sam Altman did a big TED talk about. That was somebody starting to really understand the mechanics and the forces of gravity and how it can apply to work that they can do. So I think that's a big one that I wish I could say, here's my 5 hot tips, but I'd say that's the big one, which is that you've now empowered yourself to find those use cases. So I only got through 4. I know you wanted 10, but
Yeah, we can do second interview. This has been great. As we come to a close, I'd love to ask you a question about authenticity. So some critics argue that AI undermines authenticity in storytelling and can lead to a loss of trust from audiences. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think this is a very core topic for people in the unscripted and nonfiction industries. I think like there was documentaries, there was like those things that you might watch on PBS in the 90s, and then unscripted TV came along. And then for a long time, mostly as a derogatory term. I think people would call it reality TV. They just threw this word out there. The truth was is that that industry, which I proudly worked in, that the spectrum of things that were labeled reality was everything from a show, a follow documentary series about law enforcement, to American Idol, to dating shows, to lots of things between, house reality shows, all kinds of stuff. So I'm just saying, I think there's a large spectrum of content and formats when we're telling stories about the world. And I think there's a large spectrum of relationships with your viewers. I think like if somebody watches Housewives on Bravo, I think they're okay with knowing there's producers involved. I don't really think they care. Like, I don't think I'm mad. I think they're just like, I want to see something really entertaining. I think if I watched, a science series about quantum theory, and then when I was done, it turned out like, no, we just made that up. I don't know. Like, it's all bullshit. It doesn't matter. Okay. In that case, I'm bummed. I thought I was watching something to learn. And then if I'm watching a documentary about journalists surviving a war zone in Ukraine, if you told me that we took some liberties with that film, I'd be like, well, why did you do that? Like I thought you were connecting with me about what it's really like to live in war zones. So I do think, unlike scripted, which just gets to escape your imagination, like you don't really care that Leonardo DiCaprio plays 20 different characters. It doesn't matter. In unscripted, we have that social contract that something's up. And some people care and some people don't, by the way. I think some people have fully engaged with this medium as just op-ed lands, and they just put out whatever they think and they don't really care if anybody agrees with them or not. Good for them. Free speech. Everybody's into it. I think if you are in the category of people that answer your question of saying authenticity as a premium, for starters, I think broadly in a world of infinite creativity and everything being fully imaginative, I actually think the authentic experience is going to go up in value. I think it's no surprise that sports is doing great. I think live comics that are figuring out how to own the economics on their businesses are doing great. I think if you're Taylor Swift, you know how to make money. I just keep going on tour and it's going to go great for you. So I think for starters, I think the world of authenticity is doing fine in terms of its value in society. In terms of how this fits as a product of this technology, there's very legitimate concerns about the transparency of this process, and I think it also lives on a spectrum. Like if I'm doing an ancient Rome series, there's just no pictures to point at, but maybe there's like statues and museums that I could scan and bring them to life. That's just cool. Like I think most people watch that and go like, that's pretty awesome. Thank you for helping me understand what Julius Caesar was like. If I'm showing you a World War II documentary that clearly has footage from D-Day, and then there's just this shot that looks exactly like the same quality and look and things, but just Hitler just walks through the shot in a moment that he just didn't exist in, or whatever, some other famous person that just wasn't there. Okay, well, now I'm starting to get into some dicey territory. Forget about because we're playing with Hitler. Additionally, that's problematic, but I just mean the fact that I'm introducing something that looks really real right next to something that is very real. And that is the fuzzy space that I don't think anybody's ever had to figure it out. There's nobody at a government level telling us what to do. Journalistic standards are not what they used to be in terms of like the public fully adhering to them or even respecting them. There's all kinds of, fun people debating about the role of journalism in our lives. I'm saying we're in this murky space. So that's why I get excited about the APA and the people that are standing up and saying, let's talk about this stuff. Let's create a dialogue about what does an authentic piece of documentary look like, and what is that again? If it's just there to capture the imagination of what the apocalypse might look like, then go to town, go crazy, base it in science. But none of that's real. That's just the future. But if I'm showing you like this is what David Bowie looked like as a 12-year-old, like I want to know what he actually looked like as a 12-year-old. If you de-aged him because that's what technology can do, then tell me you're doing it. I might actually think that's really cool. I might actually enjoy that effect. And I think that's the gray area in your question, is that documentary has actually spent a lot of time being imaginative. It has spent a lot of time being subjective as a genre. A lot of documentary filmmakers come from an era where they never thought of themselves as journalists. They thought of themselves as storytellers in a different medium. So I think, but they never had this technology that could create something so real that it was synthetic. And I think that's this sort of place that I think we all are contributing to, like, how can this work? How might we do this correctly? And I like being in that place where we interrogate it. I don't think anybody's right or wrong yet, because we're still, like, for example, there's a lot of debate around using generative audio to bring back people from the dead. Like the Anthony Bourdain documentary Roadrunner was this homage to a beloved treasure of a personality, and Morgan Neville, an Oscar-winning filmmaker, was brought on to direct it. It's by all accounts was something everybody's excited about. And in its moment, as one of the early films that used this technology, not transparently, they didn't go out of their way to talk about it in their marketing. They didn't even bring it up until somebody caught it. So there was a moment of like, are you pulling a fast one on me? If you remember, there was 2 sentences in the film that they used AI to bring to life. They're actual things that Anthony Bourdain wrote down. They're just things he never used his voice. At the time, it was a big uproar. Because of those moments, a lot of people have created a lot of dialogue around what's the right way to do that. But just recently, Netflix did a series with about the Gabby Petito case, a sort of classic true crime doc project. And they did the exact same thing. They got consent from the family. They did it transparently. They didn't secret. They like everything was done now correctly. But then the viewers got mad that they were bringing it out of her diaries, if I remember this correctly. That the texts that they brought to life were private thoughts of hers. So have we asked that question out loud? Like, is that okay? Is it okay to like fake somebody's voice with private thoughts? Like that's a moment of we're still discovering. And to me, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I do think that when we bump into these things, they become distractions. So minimally, if you're a storyteller that wants to tell a story to a lot of people, if everybody's just obsessing over this technical choice you made, they're not listening to your story. So that's why I think this sort of debate about authenticity is a great one. And I think some people just want like full rights to do whatever they want, like whatever, everybody likes freedom. But I think the pushback here isn't coming from a place of like the police or like people that like don't want you to make money. They're concerned people. They're people that worry about if their kids will ever live in a world with truth in it anymore. Like there's a lot of other emotions. That's why I just think this space is very emotional, and I try to engage that.
Fred, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming by and sharing all your thoughts on the intersection of AI and creativity, the intersection of AI and documentary film. And yeah, thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.